back a year ago.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. Today, we're joined by Maria Pearman. Maria graduated from the College of Charleston, where she received a Bachelor of Arts in Arts Management and a minor in French. She received her post-baccalaureate in accounting from Linfield College. Maria has been a licensed CPA since 2010. Maria has more than 15 years of public accounting experience providing accounting and advisory services to clients. She is an expert in the beverage and alcohol industry and specializes in internal accounting processes, financial reviews, budgeting, cash flow forecasting, financial strategy, and succession planning. Maria built a national practice focused on beverage alcohol clients and has helped clients to improve financial results and maximize efficiency of operations and guiding them through ownership transitions. Maria sits on the finance committee for the Brewers Association, the nation's largest industry organization for craft brewers. Published by the Brewers Association in 2019, Maria wrote a top-rated book, Small Brewery Finance, to help small businesses run more successful breweries. We're excited to speak to Maria and learn more about her exciting career and passion towards her profession, as well as learn a little bit more about her association, maybe personally, with beer. So Maria, without further ado, welcome to the Beer Bound Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're excited to speak with you, to learn a little bit more about the financial side of brewing and beer. So maybe I did scratch the surface on your extensive and elaborate life and career, but Maria, maybe you can get a little bit more into depths on your focus, your interest in beverage and beer in association with accounting, maybe a little bit more of who you are.
Sure. I went to college for a different field. I wanted to specialize in arts management. I got a degree in that, which is the business side of nonprofits. So that career path was setting me down a lane where I would work with nonprofits or art museums, usually grant funded positions. And kind of long story short, I actually ended up doing none of that and instead ended up in radio. And I was in radio for about 10 years, radio and music industry, and held like lots of different things in that realm. And then I got to my mid-20s and I was like, okay, I need to get a real job. So I had always heard, do what you love and the money will follow. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I interested in? And I made a list, and the list was very long. And at the same time, I was the kind of nerd who would get my bank statements in the mail at the end of the month and make hand-drawn charts and graphs of how I would spend my money. And so I kind of realized, okay, here's this data point about my nerdism and my long list of interests. And so I thought, okay, accounting is something that can be applied across any industry. It's infinitely transferable. So I decided to go back to school for accounting. Long story short, I earned my CPA. Fast forward, and I was in a CPA firm doing tax work. At the time, I lived in Portland, Oregon. We have, as you know, a ton of craft brewers in Portland, and I got just handed tax returns to do by happenstance because that's what was there. I saw that those brewers spent more money getting the books clean at the end of the year than they did on the tax return itself. And so that told me that there's really a need for these companies to have access to a higher level skill set, but maybe they don't need it all year long. Maybe they just need quarterly reviews or meetings to understand how their business is doing through the year, which would be, light years ahead of where they were currently, which is, not having an idea of how the business was performing until March of the next year, let's say. So with that, opportunity in front of me, I thought, okay, there's something here where I can form a business doing contract controller services for breweries. So I had that premise of an idea, and I got my first client to say yes. And when I got that first client, I decided to step out of the firm, start my own business, contract controller services for breweries. And it was specific because having a niche focus was going to be my differentiator that would allow me to compete with, larger firms. So I did that. That theory played out. It did work as I thought it would. And I expanded services to bookkeeping, tax preparation. Um, I did payroll taxes for a while as well. And the idea was that this firm knows breweries. And that idea went really well. And at the time, the industry seemed a little tumultuous. If you fast forward to where we are now, it was nothing like where we are today. That made, those early years seem like calm waters. But I could tell that things were shifting quickly. And if I wanted to work with a particular industry, I needed to level up and know it better than most. And that would allow me to continue to work with the the healthier clients that were in that space. In other words, the ones that weren't going to go out of business. And by focusing on a particular lane, that also proved to be true, that I was able to work with larger, more robust, more sophisticated clients within the brewery sphere. So all of these theories were seeming to pan out. Um, my firm, we grew. We had about 15 people at the largest point, and I ran that for 7 years. And it got to the point where the needs of the client were starting to outstrip my expertise. So I either had to bring in other partners who knew, other technical aspects better than I did, or take what I had built and put it into a larger environment. So I did. I took my practice and transitioned it to a larger firm to be able to offer a large suite of services to these clients who were getting, more and more robust in their needs. And still with a core of people who very strongly know the brewing industry. And one of the things that I love about the brewing industry is the tenor of the culture. It's so collegial, collaborative, laid back, authentic, and that resonates with me. I love working with this clientele because they are very transparent, very authentic, easy to get along with, value the services that you bring to the table. So I had seemed to stumble upon a sweet spot of a need in the market, something that I particularly enjoy, and and then it was kind of off to the races. So um, the practice that I built is nationwide. Got clients in, whether it's Boston or Florida or all corners of the U.S. and some Canadian and Central American as well. So it's been really fun. And as the trend of beer has started to give a little market share towards spirits, we all see spirits gaining market share, and the spirit side is experiencing a growth curve similar to what craft beer had 10, 15 years ago. And so now a lot of my practice is bringing spirits on board and helping them in a similar way as I help breweries as well. So it's been interesting to understand a different segment of beverage alcohol. It is it is really interesting to me that the culture does shift slightly as you go from beer to spirits to wine. Every sector, every lane has its own nuances, needs, and preferences in how they communicate and do business. But I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, one of the things that I love most about my job is that, um, as you guys know, that so many people approach their business as true artisans and true craftspeople. And they are pouring their identity, their livelihood, their life savings into this particular endeavor. So I feel a lot of responsibility to help shepherd that along and get it to a place of success, because it is truly their hopes and dreams that are wrapped up in this entity. And most of the folks that I help, they're great at a lot of things, but financials is not at the top of the list. And I see this as a way that I can come in and support and maybe take away some blockers that they would otherwise have, and give them a better chance of bringing what they do best into the world and fulfilling their, personal dreams. So it sounds a bit woo woo, and maybe it is, but I do love that about it. I feel a great honor in being able to help some of these companies, progress along their paths. But yeah, that's kind of a lot, but that's in a nutshell why I like it and how I ended up here.
Maria, can you tell us how unique your expertise are? Like, are there other accountants or other accounting firms all across the US who specialize in craft breweries, or now the large influx of small craft seltzer producers or spirit producers? Is that something that's quite unique to what you do, or do you see other players across the country doing the same thing?
There are other players across the country, but there's variations in what the services are provided. For example, you might have an accounting firm that just offers tax services, um, or they just offer bookkeeping but no tax or something like that. And there's also different levels of the degree of um, how do I want to, I guess the degree in which they're willing to get their hands dirty with the material. Some places are going to take the information provided by the client and take that and run with it. Other people are going to take that, identify some issues, help propose solutions, implement solutions, and truly fix something that needs to be fixed. So there's definitely a gamut of services offered and level of service provided in terms of how deep they're going to go with the client. I'd say I could count on one hand the number of accounting service providers in the country who really, really, really know the space well. So there's not a lot of us.
You seem to have a strong grasp on the financials of brewing in different states. Do rules and regulations around finances, do those change quite drastically between different areas of the United States? You said you work with some breweries in Canada and Central America as well. I suspect that's a whole different game in itself, but are things kind of consistent? How different do the financials differ from state to state?
State to state, it's not that different in terms of the accounting reporting. What does differ greatly is the regulatory environment. I'm sure you guys know that in the US, there's the 3-tier system, and there are federal guidelines that apply to everybody. However, state sets their own rules and state leads. So you could be operating in neighboring states, and the rules around how you go to market is completely different. For example, let's take Oregon and Washington. If you're talking about spirits, if you want to buy a bottle of spirits in Oregon, you have to go to a state-run liquor store to buy it. It's not available in grocery stores. But if you go to Washington, neighboring state, you can walk into a Costco and buy it. So there are lots of different nuances around that, but it's more about the regulatory environment and less the financial reporting.
Does any of that maybe trickle down to, for lack of a better word, some accounting tricks or maybe some strategies in terms of accounting, or is it all still, I guess pretty consistent?
There aren't any particular strategies related to beer per se that are different from other manufacturing environments. Most of the strategy comes in related to manufacturing operations. So, a brewery is a manufacturing operation, and so is a bicycle shop. But a brewery and a bicycle shop are vastly different. So there's not a lot of unique strategy per se with breweries from a financial reporting perspective. But when you kind of broaden the lens and step back a bit further, if you look at manufacturing operations, there definitely are different strategies that can work better from a financial perspective there. And most of that has to come down to fixed assets, capitalization, depreciation, treatment of inventory.
On the business side of things, Maria, have you established yourself? Are you deep into the industry far enough that you are looking for more clients, or you've capped it the amount of clients you work with? Are you looking to expand, or you're happy where you currently are?
Personally, for my dance card right now, at this moment, it's pretty full, but I love the idea of expanding with more breweries. What that means is that more personnel needs to come on to service them. We have a team of about 9 people who focus exclusively on beverage alcohol. And I would love to get more team members coming on who want to help in that capacity. One thing that I think our firm does really well is to truly serve as an advisor to clients, and that has to do with rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty with the information. So I would love to have more people on board who are interested in working with clients in that way.
Do you work with you mentioned like a bike shop is different from a craft brewery, but in terms of the financials, they're not all that different. Do you expand or branch out at all, or you're strictly dealing with alcohol beverage?
I do work with food clients as well. So I'm exclusively food and beverage. And then within food and beverage, I'd say I don't know, maybe 60% beer, 30% spirits, and the remainder is food.
Can you get into the psychology a little bit? You obviously spend quite a bit of time with brewery owners, or perhaps the managerial or administrative side of breweries, craft breweries, I should say. What are some key components you see in these individuals? You mentioned there was some lacking or some deficit in some financial competence on the side of breweries and brewery owners. What can you tell us about the consistencies that you see within different craft breweries across the country, and some nuances in terms of people, financial competency? Give us a little bit of scope in that regard.
Well, a lot of it comes down to what phase the brewery is in. So if it's a small startup, usually it's going to be something that is run by an owner operator. And I mean, not to say it's always the case, but I'd say largely these are people who are very passionate about the industry, and they got into the business because they love making beer. They love the community, and it's their passion. It's all wrapped up in the product. Occasionally I've had clients who come from another background, like maybe they were an engineer or something like that, and then kind of fell into brewing through a hobby, and maybe got sick of their other career or whatever. But if you take that artisan mentality, it's the product that's coming first, and so the business aspects are necessary evil to a lot of folks. So I feel like what I do is trying to help cure some of those weak spots in their realm. And for leaders in the space of breweries, for brewery owners, some of the key things I think they really need to understand are the basic levers of cash flow, the need to understand the competitive market that they're operating in, not only for breweries in general, but also specifically in their particular town. What is the competitive landscape? Obviously, they need to know how to brew good beer, but most of them already have that. And then they need to understand the regulatory environment and how distribution works, because if they are going to have a production brewery of any size, they really do need to understand the distribution side of things, and that can be a game changer for a brewery. So I think that the business side is always maybe the boring stuff, and I try to provide a little bit of financial literacy and some knowledge that can help them build a good foundation. And or maybe I'm building the foundation and they're just carrying forward after the structure is there. But you can't build any kind of sustainable business without some of those fundamentals.
So if a brewer was going to come to you, let's say, like you're saying, owner operator, maybe a little wet behind the ears on the business side, what are some of those fundamentals? Like what are maybe like the top three if you had that first conversation with the brewer?
I think a lot of it is there's things that I mentioned about understanding cash flow and understanding the regulatory environment. You also need to really understand what margin is attached to your product. And I'd say if you ask me, like, the number one thing that I work with clients on, it's about correct recognition of cost of goods and identifying what the margin is on all the products that they sell. Basically, you shouldn't sell a product if there's not margin attached to it when it leaves your door. And a lot of times that's not the case because people don't really know how to recognize COGS, or maybe they just get excited about making a particular beer but don't think through the economics of it before it's out the door. So, profitability, cash flow, those two things are foundational. And I guess one other piece that I'd add is helping them understand how to read a balance sheet. And the reason why I harp on that is because the balance sheet often gets ignored. If you've got two main financial reports, it's the balance sheet and the income statement. Income statement is kind of easy. Everybody gets it. It tells you if you made money or not. Balance sheet is a little more mysterious and can be challenging for people to wrap their head around. But the beautiful thing about a balance sheet is that it's like sticking a thermometer in your business and telling you how the company is doing at a particular moment in time. And it's going to show you the performance of that brewery over the course of all the years that you've been in business through retained earnings. It'll also show you how leveraged or not you are with debt. So it is a really important piece of it.
Well, Maria, you mentioned passion, and I think it's definitely suffice to say that most craft brewery owners go in with some level of passion. But do you see that force? I'm going to get a little woo-woo here, but do you see that sense of passion? Do you see having too much passion towards an endeavor such as a craft brewery? Do you see that as a hindrance? Is passion perhaps not such a benevolent or productive force? You should probably have more of a financial approach to any business, whether it be craft beer or bicycle shop.
That's a
or
tough
anything.
question. I mean, it's like, of course, passion is important, and that's the thing that makes it magic. But you also have to walk into it with your eyes wide open, and just like there does need to be 1 foot on the ground, 1 foot in the clouds, or whatever. Just an awareness. You can't walk around without being attuned to the financial situation, because that's a recipe for disaster. But I think, passion goes a long way, and passion can propel people to do things that seem otherwise inconceivable. So I wouldn't count it out, but I don't know, if you're asking me one or the other, what's it going to be, level-headedness or passion? I'd say probably level-headedness.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, maybe you're not able to go too far into this, but do you have experience, Maria, of working with craft breweries who have unfortunately gone out of business?
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are there any key factors you've seen other than the obvious ones of
I would say the number one thing is just waiting too long to make a change. I'd say most people see it on the horizon. They're seeing it in the numbers. It might be 2 months go by with a negative trend, then it's 3 months, and they're sitting on it, waiting. And then at some point it's just too late. So it's like not taking action soon enough. And particularly around payroll, because nobody wants to fire anybody. And that can be such a sensitive topic. But payroll sucks because it's your biggest expense, but it's also the one that's the hardest to cut because, people are involved. So that's it.
Stuff. I guess you're the voice of reason, where you gotta be a little bit louder at the beginning if you see a red flag, and try and maybe, I guess, veer the brewer away from that expensive hazy IPA that may cost a little bit more. So to maybe hold off a little bit.
beer it's a people business in many different ways, whether it be dealing with a team, you're dealing with you're in a customer service role. Do you see key individuals? You have a little bit of depth in seeing the underbelly of how these businesses function. Do you see individuals who really act in a certain way that benefit the growth of a brewery, whether it be of a certain position? What are the most key fundamental roles that you see within successful breweries that really stand out?
It depends on if you're talking about, a tap room versus a production brewery, because those are different. But I would say if you're talking production brewery, I think that understanding how to work with distributors effectively is extremely important. And then if it's a tap room, maximizing the revenue that's coming out of that square footage. And I mean, tap rooms are really margin rich and they're great, but they also have a ceiling because you're limited to the number of days a week, the number of hours per day you're open, the number of square footage, all this stuff. But there are different strategies that can be used to maximize that along the way. So understanding what those strategies are in a tap room environment is really important.
Right. Where does the big growth come from that you see in particular craft breweries? Like where is in breweries that you've worked with, the specific ones that stand out that really do well in terms of expanding the quickest and most in the most robust fashion? Like where does that,
Mm.
if you're really looking to pour gasoline on the fire as an ambitious brewery owner, what are some ways that really exacerbate increased production and
I
revenue?
think it's a willingness to be attuned to the trends that are happening and maximize on that. So, for example, if it's hazy IPA trend, get in there, do it well, hit it hard, maximize your presence in the space, and then get out when it's time to get out. And just it's almost an awareness of where the market is going and a boldness to not be afraid of doing it wrong, or not be afraid of playing small. Like, it, go in, do it well, be bold, and then getting out of there before you've outstayed your welcome.
I mean, you mentioned, Maria, obviously the growth of craft beer in a dynamic economic powerhouse like the United States in the last, let's say, decade and a half has really changed, to say the least. It's really exploded over the last few years in particular. We had a bit of a weird bump with COVID, but things seem to be leveling out again. And I think you'd agree that the growth is kind of coming back. But do you see the world of craft beer? We can focus and stick to the United States. Do you see there still being some prosperity to be had in individuals who are looking to jump into the market with another craft brewery? Or do you see the saturation of the market as being too insurmountable now for individuals who want to jump into the game? Is it too late?
No, it's not too late, but you just need to understand your differentiator. The growth of craft as a whole is waning, and then as I mentioned earlier, the growth of spirits is kind of picking up. And I'd say like the growth of craft is waning for three primary reasons. One is that the industry has reached a level of maturity where it won't sustain that double digit growth. Number two, fractured offerings of beyond beer, and number three, the rise of spirits. So craft beer is really having a tough time right now, but there's still ways to win if you know your lane and can do it really well. And you just gotta be consistent and understand exactly what your brand position is in the market. I think that spirits has a lot of opportunity ahead of it. And then I think the beyond beer is it's like such a crapshoot. Like one thing is hot this week and then another thing is hot next week. And so people are kind of winning in that space, but then I think there's also a lot of losing as well because the trends within beyond beer seems to be shifting quite a bit. Now, non-alc is an element of that I do think has some staying power. But to get back to your question, you had asked like, should people get into this now? I'd say yeah, if you know what your brand promise is to the consumer.
Maria, you're really intelligent on the sort of the artistic side of craft beer and brewing. You're really tapped into, no pun intended, the creative side and of how important it is for craft brewers to stay present and to stay on point in terms of what the styles of the day are and sort of how that relates to the particular respective communities where the craft breweries are located. Do you see this sort of feature of beer and craft brewery? Do you see that as really principally a phenomenon of craft beer, or can you relate that to another potential product? Is there any other industry that you think of that moves this quickly in terms of having a new something of the day, or having to stay up to trends in such a rapid and quick moving pace?
That's interesting. I've never thought about it. But just off the cuff, something that comes to mind is the fitness industry. It's like in the fitness industry, there's, a new exercise program or club or, supplement or diet or whatever. I feel like that is just totally fad driven. That comes to mind. I don't know. I'd have to give it some thought.
Right. Do you think that sort of industry, obviously you're in it, you're you're devoted to working with these particular entrepreneurs and small business owners. Do you see this as a healthy component that goes along with craft beer? Do you think we need a little bit more? I mean, you mentioned that craft beer is waning a little bit. Do you see this cultural association that goes along with craft beer of constantly changing? This month, this particular style is in vogue, and then maybe a few months later, something else changes. Do you think this sort of constant insanity that goes along with the client wanting different styles of beer, do you think that's healthy for a particular business?
I don't think that everybody has to play by those rules of catering to the fad. And let me talk a little bit more about that. The fad thing, if you take the consumer base of craft, there's going to be your beer nerds who are hyper attuned to the flavor of the week. And then there's also a large layer of consumers that just enjoy craft because it represents an elevated experience to their large beer houses, your Budweisers or Miller, and so they'll appreciate the artisanship that goes into it. And so I think that a brewery can be successful even if they're not just catering to that flavor of the week. If they're like, a great example is Jack's Abbey in Boston. They make lagers, and that's all they make. I mean, they don't do any ales. And like when you think about lagers, it's kind of a narrow lane, but they like know who they are. They hit it. They own the space, and there are tons of people who are very loyal followers to them because they appreciate the style, they appreciate the quality that particular brand represents, the connection that brand has made to the Boston community. They have really done it well and found a way to connect with consumers in a way that makes it really sticky, and they can scale with that. So I do think, like, if you're a brewer who is kind of getting whiplash from trying to serve all these different masters and all these kind of changing styles, that is not a good recipe, because you just can't ever get traction. And by the time you figured out how to do something effectively and economically, styles have changed. So that's tough. But there is a lane in craft where you can reach a broader audience and find some scale and do it well. I mean, the other hand, you could take the route of being specialty brewer, where it's low volume, very curated experience, and high dollar for your beer. That's one way to go as well. I do think that route, the revenue ceiling is a little more limited.
Maria, you mentioned margins, obviously, and how it's pretty important to stay above those. And whether you're running a tap room or you're distributing through retail, making sure that you're actually making money off of your product, that's a pretty key, important feature to any business, certainly in craft beer and beer itself. So do you see a consistency in margins across different craft breweries all across the country? Or is there quite a big difference, whether it be in retail or within a tap room?
For the most part, margins are consistent. Now, that you hit on something really important, which is the sales channel, whether it's tap room or production facility. And I mean, those margins are vastly different. And what you make in the tap room is going to be a lot more lucrative than what you make by putting your beer on the shelf in the grocery store. So those are vastly different. But within a particular sales channel, it's roughly the same. The differences might be, actually probably comes down mostly to shipping costs. if you're in an area where you've got a closer proximity to your ingredients or to where your beer is actually going to end up on the shelf, that will change your COGS.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I suspect you are aware in the province of Ontario where we live, Toronto, we have a massive government run, basically monopolistic vendor, which is the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, that distributes most of the beer across the province. And it seems like with talking with craft breweries all across Ontario, it seems like most of the revenue, most of the margins are terrific. If someone walks into the brew pub and actually orders a beer, those margins are terrific. And then actually going through the supply chains and getting your beer onto the shelf at the LCBO, the margins are so razor thin, as well as it is seen maybe as more of a marketing play as opposed to actually making a dollar. Just having your beer on the shelf is a good way to promote your product, and you make a little bit of money with the enormous amount of work that goes to getting that beer on the shelf. Do you see that all across the United States as well? Are there some states that differ? What's that like?
No, the margins are usually the same across all states because by and large, distributors are taking like roughly the same cut. So there's not a lot of variation there. Yeah, geographically, it's not. Well, now I guess one difference is if you're comparing sort of on-premise sales in your tap room, for example, if you've got a tap room in Topeka, Kansas, and another tap room in some really hot tourist destination, Vail, Colorado, then you have greater latitude to charge more for your beer because it's a tourist destination and money is not going to be as big of a factor. So you have like some factors like that, but for the most part, there's not a lot of variation.
In terms of giving advice, if you were to do if you were to give any financial advice to craft brewers, would you say to steer in one direction or the other, like really pushing your tap room, or going the other way and scaling things up and getting your product out there on shelves in order for them to expand your brand as well as make a little bit of profit that way? Is there one that you would really suggest focusing on?
I would definitely start in the tap room route, the on-premise route, because the margins are so much greater. And I would be very cautious at this phase we're in right now about building a large production facility. There's so many options for contract manufacturing that can allow a brand to slowly grow until it's ready to build its own facility. So yeah, I'd say, start small. Definitely keep your overhead manageable. And in the first years of the business, the focus should be on cash flow as opposed to profit. And then once you get your legs under you, there's a little more experience under your belt, healthier balance sheet, then you can start to focus on profitability. But like a lot of people, a great example is buying in bulk. A lot of people will get wrapped around the axle about trying to buy in bulk to get a lower price per unit. But the truth is that from a cash flow perspective, that really is a killer because you might be spending $40,000 in one go for a shipment of whatever it is. And just, learning how to manage cash is the number one thing before you start worrying about the profit.
Do you see a lot of brewers like really itching to make that jump? Obviously, there's kind of what you're saying is a lot of importance in building a brand and maybe starting that and doing that small. But do you see maybe some brewers a little more eager than they should be? Are you there to sort of pump the brakes a little bit, or for the most part, a lot of the plans that you're seeing sort of on par with what you might recommend?
A lot of that unbridled enthusiasm has tamped down over the past couple years with the growth rates falling, but it's still there. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the person, but there's still very ambitious people out there. I'd say the number of business plans that I see today where, sometimes I would get a business plan and I just think this is completely unachievable. How are you planning on doing this? That would be, not uncommon. But the business plans I see today are pretty well thought out. So I think people are hearing the data points and taking them to heart and taking a more measured approach.
Do you also provide, like, obviously you're under the hood for a number of different breweries. Is there some maybe aspect of your business where it's more analytical? You provide research in a sense to, to give, I don't know, maybe new clients a pulse to help guide them, or is that something that's kind of not, not part of your service?
Yeah. Yeah, we identify key performance indicators and industry benchmarks and talk with clients about you know, how to measure their performance and how to think about their numbers versus industry standards, which can be really helpful because it serves as a, I don't know, just it's just a really useful tool, a critical tool for business owners to have.
Jumping off point, I guess someone might come to you with KPIs they think are important, but I guess you could probably see it in a different lens and give that perspective. Hmm,
Yeah.
interesting. Cool.
Maria, do you have a sense of how long it takes, maybe your clients in particular, or maybe across the board, of how long it takes a craft brewery to actually make a profit?
Roughly 3 years. And that's, again, it's going to depend on if your business model is taproom focused or production focused, but like give or take 3 years. So yeah, I use that as a rule of thumb, and that's what I've seen bear out in my experience.
If a brewery is not running a profit by 3 years, what would you tell them?
I mean, it could be for a number of reasons. Uh, there are elements of expenses that can be measured differently, and particularly those are components of EBITDA. So your interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, those can be measured differently where two identical companies, if they measure interest differently, or rather if they have interest and the other doesn't, or if they measure depreciation differently than the other one, it can appear that one is in the red and one is in the black, when in fact the operations are the same. So I would use EBITDA as your measuring stick versus net income. And if you are still not EBITDA positive by the end of 3 years, I would take a hard look at that. And I would start by looking at the margin by SKU. So I would look at all the SKUs you sell, figure out what the margin is on rolling 12 months. Where are you, where are you making money? Where are you losing money? How many products are you offering where you're at a loss? And really take a look at that, make sure you're rationalizing all of your SKUs. And then second is looking at payroll. And then a close third is rent, but rent is so variable based on particular geographies. And the big ticket items are COGS and payroll.
Do you see, obviously you mentioned rent being very different if you're starting a brewery in San Francisco or St. Louis? Those are, oh, I think fell. If you're starting a brewery in, say, San Francisco or St. Louis, those are going to be very different in terms of renting a piece of property or piece of real estate. Would you recommend, are there particular points or locations across the United States that really you see real estate costs that are low, as well as an interest for craft beer that's quite high? Do you see sort of a correlation there between locations in the United States? Maybe that's a little too in depth.
No, I don't really, I don't know. I haven't ever looked at the data that way, so I don't have any insight into the relationship between rent prices and the affinity for beer. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that.
Maria, you're located in Oregon, is that right?
Los Angeles.
Right.
Mhm.
So do you see continual, you said that the craft beer movement all across the US is waning. Can you expand on that a little bit? In what sense is it waning?
The growth rate, the growth rate, the growth rate is waning, meaning that it's just growing at a slower pace. Um, and again, I think like the three kind of main drivers of that is the maturity of the industry, so it can't sustain this mega growth rate for too much longer. The beyond beer category, and then the rise of spirits. That's all kind of coming together to put the brakes on craft.
So Maria, if I were to give you a magic crystal ball, we obviously know what craft beer has done in the past decade, maybe in the past 15 years, maybe until the end of this decade into 2030. Do you see further waning? Do you see further decrease in terms of the number of breweries? Do you see sort of a stagnation in numbers? Do you see a decline, perhaps a
I
steady
think
increase
it'll
still
I
happening?
think it'll level out. Like if you kind of take a step back and look at, if you consider craft beer as a as one business, just playing with this idea of craft beer as one business. Every business follows a similar life cycle of emergence and rapid growth, and then they kind of slow down and they reach maturity and they plateau for a long time, and then eventually they decline. And we're just kind of reaching the top of that curve where we're about to level off and reach maturity. And so I think it'll be cruising altitude for a long time. I think there's a long runway there. But within that long plateau runway, I think there's going to be a lot of changes. Like, what are people drinking? I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation with breweries, with distributors. How are we getting our product? You know, the direct consumer movement is huge. So it's, when I say it's going to plateau and be steady, that sounds simple and safe, but within that, there's a lot of variability when you zoom in a little closer. I think it's still going to be a volatile time for individual businesses in the industry.
When I asked you earlier, you if someone is still passionate about craft beer and craft brewing, you wouldn't necessarily say it's all doom and gloom. There is a little bit of potential growth still to be had. Is that suffice to say?
I think what I said is know your lane. Know
Know your
your
lane.
lane and do it very well, and
Yeah.
and stick to it. Because I mean, there are still places to win. I mean, certainly, you know, there's still a lot of places to win, whether that means picking a particular style or picking a particular go-to-market strategy or taproom experience. There are lots of ways that you can still find a unique lane.
Now, you mentioned, Maria, about some of your clients were contract brewers, and that's a good way to sort of get your foot in the door before actually investing in a brick and mortar establishment to have an actual location. Would you say that still a large swath of the brewers that you work for are contract brewers, or most have their own location?
No, most of my clients have their own location.
Yeah. Do you see that as kind of the right play? Would you advise individuals to go that route in terms of getting your foot in the door, or it's more substantial if you're really wanting to go all in, actually investing in a brand and having your own established area, having a neighborhood presence to expand your awareness, your brand awareness?
Yeah, I would not start big. I would start small and utilize contract brewers as a way to slowly expand and prove your concept before going all in on either building or leasing your own production facility, because that can be a really expensive endeavor.
I like that. Start small. Don't go head first into this. I think some very profound and intelligent conservative principles of not getting too ahead of yourself. That's great. Maria, we really thank you for your time speaking with us today. I would love to know, maybe a final question. Do you have a particular beer of choice? Do you like beer at all? We didn't get into that at all.
I do. I like beer. A beer of choice, man. Well, probably if I was going to choose one, and I don't even know if it's made anymore, but it's Firestone Walker's Pivo Pills. That's my favorite.
Right. Are there any craft breweries in Los Angeles that you're particularly fond of?
Oh yeah, there's actually Los Angeles is a great craft town. Paperback Brewing in Los Angeles makes some great beer. Really big, bold beers, high quality, fun brand. They're great. Highland Park Brewing in Los Angeles is fantastic. Really exceptional quality beer. Those are two of my faves.
Wonderful.
Yes, I'll
Well,
check them out.
Yeah, definitely. Maria Pearman, expert in small brewery finance. We appreciate your time and look forward to connecting again in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.